The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Sheila tightened them with unnecessary force. My camping gear lay scattered across the ground, my weekend plans destroyed in minutes. The small crowd of locals gathered at the edge of the park, their whispers carrying on the wind. "You think you can just come to my town and do whatever you want?" Sheriff Sheila leaned in close, her badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "This land is under my protection." I looked down at my camping permit lying torn on the ground between us. The permit that had been approved weeks ago. The permit that should have protected my right to be here. "This is public land," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You cannot do this." She smiled then, a cold, calculated smile that never reached her eyes. "Watch me." That was the moment I realized what this town already knew. Sheriff Sheila was not protecting the law. She was the law, and no one had ever challenged her. Until now. Nature has always been my sanctuary. The place where the noise of everyday life fades away, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. I am not a complicated man. I do not need much to be content. Just a patch of earth, a simple tent, and the vast canopy of stars above me. This is how I have always found peace. This is how I have always cleared my head. For the past 7 years, I have made it a tradition to camp alone at Pinewood Park during the first weekend of spring. The park sits just outside the small town of Riverdale, nestled between rolling hills and a winding river that catches the light of the morning sun in ways that make you believe in something greater than yourself. It is not a fancy place. There are no luxury accommodations or resort-style amenities. Just nature in its purest form, preserved for those who appreciate its quiet grandeur. I secured my camping permit 3 weeks in advance, as I always did. The process was straightforward: file the paperwork, pay the modest fee, receive the stamped approval. I had never encountered any issues before. The rangers knew me by name at this point. "Back for your spring meditation, Mr. Lawson?" they would ask with knowing smiles. And I would nod, grateful for the predictability, for the certainty that this one place would remain unchanged in an ever-changing world. The morning of my trip arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. I loaded my truck with practiced efficiency. Tent, sleeping bag, cooking supplies, enough food for 3 days, books I had been saving for this exact occasion. Everything had its place, each item carefully selected to enhance the experience without unnecessary complication. I arrived at Pinewood Park just after 10 in the morning. The parking area was nearly empty, exactly as I preferred it. Most visitors would not arrive until later in the afternoon or the following day. This gave me time to set up at my leisure, to reacquaint myself with the rhythm of the outdoors without interruption. My usual spot waited for me, a small clearing 50 yards from the main trail, with a natural stone formation that provided the perfect windbreak for my tent. I unloaded my gear and began the familiar routine of setting up camp. There was something meditative about the process. The steady rhythm of hammering tent stakes into the soft ground, the careful arrangement of my small campsite, each action deliberate, purposeful, grounding me in the present moment. I had just finished securing the rainfly when I heard the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. A white SUV with the Riverdale Sheriff's Department logo emblazoned on its side pulled up nearby. Behind the wheel sat a woman I had never seen before. She wore a beige uniform with a five-pointed star on her chest, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Sheriff Sheila. I did not know her name then, but I would never forget it after this weekend. She did not exit the vehicle. Instead, she watched me through the windshield, her gaze calculating and cold. I raised my hand in a friendly wave, thinking perhaps she was merely conducting a routine check of the park grounds. She did not wave back. She simply observed, taking note of everything, my truck, my equipment, me. After several uncomfortable minutes, she drove away without a word. I tried to shake off the uneasiness that had settled over me. Perhaps she was new to the job, still learning the routine. Perhaps she was simply doing her due diligence. I returned to my tasks, determined not to let this brief encounter disrupt the peace I had come here to find. As the afternoon stretched before me, I finished setting up camp and began gathering wood for the evening fire. The encounter with the sheriff faded from my thoughts, replaced by the simple joy of being outdoors. I had no way of knowing that her silent assessment was merely the prelude to what would become the most unexpected battle of my ordinary life. The fire crackled with a comforting familiarity as I sat beside it, cradling a cup of coffee between my palms. The first day of camping always filled me with a profound sense of contentment. The necessary tasks completed, the evening stretching before me with nothing but silence and starlight. I had just opened my dog-eared copy of Thoreau when the sound of multiple engines shattered the tranquility. 3 vehicles approached my campsite, the sheriff's SUV I had seen earlier, followed by 2 patrol cars. They parked in a semicircle around my camp, their headlights creating harsh shadows against the trees. The message was clear. I was being surrounded. Sheriff Sheila emerged from her vehicle first, followed by 2 deputies. Both men were tall and broad-shouldered, their expressions impassive as they flanked their superior. She approached with measured steps, one hand resting casually on her holstered weapon. "Sir, you need to pack up your belongings and vacate this area immediately," she announced without preamble, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience. I set my coffee down slowly, confusion washing over me. "I am sorry, Sheriff, but I have a permit to camp here for the weekend." "That permit has been revoked due to safety concerns," she replied, her expression revealing nothing. "Safety concerns," I echoed, looking around at the peaceful clearing. "What safety concerns?" "This area has been designated as potentially unsafe for civilian use. We are conducting specialized field training in the vicinity." I reached for my backpack and withdrew the folded permit, still crisp in its official envelope. "I have the proper documentation right here. It was approved by the Park Service 3 weeks ago." She extended her hand and I passed her the permit, certain this would resolve the misunderstanding. She examined it briefly, her face unreadable. Then, with deliberate slowness, she tore the paper in half, and then in quarters. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness of the forest. "As I said," she continued, dropping the pieces onto the dirt at my feet, "the permit has been revoked. Park safety is under my jurisdiction, and I have determined this area is unsuitable for camping at this time." I stared at the torn pieces of my permit, disbelief turning rapidly to indignation. "You cannot do that. I filed everything properly. I have been camping here for years without incident." "Things change," she said simply. "You have 30 minutes to pack up and leave or my deputies will assist you. And trust me, you do not want their assistance." The implications of her threat hung in the air between us. I looked from her face to the expressionless deputies standing behind her, then to the torn permit on the ground. This was wrong, fundamentally wrong, but I recognized the futility of arguing further. Not here. Not now. Not with 3 armed officers clearly prepared to enforce her arbitrary decree. "Fine," I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "I will leave." Sheriff Sheila nodded, satisfied with my capitulation. "Smart decision." She remained standing there, watching as I began dismantling my camp. The coffee by the fire grew cold, forgotten. The peaceful weekend I had planned crumbled with each stake I pulled from the ground. Each item I packed away with shaking hands, not from fear, but from suppressed anger. To add to the humiliation, a family walking along the nearby trail slowed to watch the spectacle. The parents whispered to each other, their children staring openly. Another couple passed, their eyes downcast, hurrying past as though witnessing something shameful. Word would spread. In a town this small, it always did. I worked in silence, aware of Sheriff Sheila's unwavering gaze. The deputies remained by their vehicles, occasionally exchanging comments too low for me to hear. I had the distinct impression they were amused by my predicament. 30 minutes later, my truck was loaded, my campsite erased as though I had never been there. Only the scattered ashes of my short-lived fire remained as evidence of my presence. "I trust we will not have any further issues," Sheriff Sheila said as I closed the truck's tailgate with more force than necessary. I met her gaze directly. "Why are you doing this?" For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. Satisfaction, perhaps, or the simple pleasure of exercising power without consequence. "I am merely enforcing the rules, Mr. Lawson." The fact that she knew my name without me providing it only deepened my unease. Safe travels. I drove away with the weight of injustice settling heavy in my chest. My weekend was ruined. My annual tradition destroyed. But more than that, my sense of fairness, of right and wrong, had been profoundly shaken. As the park receded in my rearview mirror, the humiliation began to transform into something else, something harder and more determined. This was not over, not by a long shot. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in my bed, the comfort of my home offering little solace as my mind replayed the encounter with Sheriff Sheila. The torn permit, the smug certainty in her eyes, the casual display of authority unchecked by accountability. By morning, my initial anger had crystallized into resolution. I needed to understand what had happened and why. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and began searching for information about Sheriff Sheila Harmon of Riverdale County. The results were illuminating. She had been elected 3 years ago, running unopposed after the previous sheriff retired. Her campaign had emphasized community safety and traditional values, innocuous phrases that resonated with the predominantly conservative town. But beneath the official narrative, other stories emerged. I found a local community forum where residents discussed town matters. Searching for sheriff brought up dozens of threads, many with titles that caught my attention immediately. Concert in the park canceled by sheriff's office. Wedding permit denied last minute. Small business fined for outdoor market. I clicked on the first thread and began reading. 6 months ago, a local music teacher had organized a student concert in Riverdale Park. All permits had been secured, parents had built a small stage, programs had been printed. The morning of the event, Sheriff Sheila arrived with deputies and declared the gathering unsafe due to crowd control concerns. The concert was canceled, leaving dozens of children disappointed and parents furious. The second thread told a similar story. A young couple had planned their wedding in the botanical garden section of the park. 2 days before the ceremony, their permit was revoked due to security issues. They scrambled to find an alternative venue, incurring significant additional expenses. Pattern after pattern emerged as I read through the discussions. Sheriff Sheila had systematically inserted herself into the approval process for any public gathering, using vague safety concerns to shut down events that had already received proper authorization from other town departments. I found myself reaching for my phone. I needed to speak with these people, to hear their stories directly. The first call I made was to Martin Reynolds, the music teacher mentioned in the concert thread. "Mr. Reynolds, my name is David Lawson. I am calling about the student concert that was canceled last year." His voice grew guarded. "What about it?" "I had a similar experience with Sheriff Harmon this weekend. She revoked my camping permit without explanation. I am trying to understand if this is part of a pattern." The silence on the line lasted several seconds before he responded, his voice lowered. "Look, I do not like to cause trouble, but what happened wasn't right. We had everything approved. The kids had practiced for months. Then she showed up with some story about inadequate security protocols and threatened to cite me for creating a public hazard if we proceeded." "Did you challenge her decision?" He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "With what? She's the law around here. Besides, I have to live in this town. I teach these kids. Starting a fight with the sheriff isn't exactly good for business." I thanked him and moved on to the next call and the next. By mid-afternoon, I had spoken with 7 people, each with a variation of the same story. Sheriff Sheila exercising arbitrary authority. Vague citations of safety or security. No recourse for appeal. The most devastating account came from Elaine Mercer, whose son used a wheelchair. The local scout troop had organized a camping trip specifically designed to be accessible for children with disabilities. They had constructed temporary wooden pathways, secured special permits, arranged for medical personnel to be present. Sheriff Sheila shut it down halfway through the first day, citing environmental concerns. "My boy cried for days," Elaine told me, her voice breaking. "He had been looking forward to it for months, to be included, to do what the other kids do, and she took that away from him with a piece of paper and a badge." "Did anyone file a complaint?" I asked. Several parents tried. The complaints disappeared into administrative black holes. One father who pushed too hard found himself pulled over every day for a week, cited for everything from a broken tail light to suspicious driving patterns. I thanked her for sharing her story and promised to stay in touch. Then I sat back, staring at the pages of notes I had accumulated. This was not random. This was not one overzealous officer having a bad day. This was systematic abuse of power, a pattern of control exercised through intimidation and selective enforcement. I created a spreadsheet, meticulously recording each incident: dates, locations, stated reasons for revocation, actual outcomes. I saved screenshots of the forum discussions, recorded my phone conversations with permission, and began compiling a comprehensive document that outlined Sheriff Sheila's abuse of authority. What had begun as personal indignation was evolving into something more significant. I was not just fighting for my right to camp in peace. I was uncovering a system of unchecked authority that affected an entire community, a community that had been silenced by fear and the mistaken belief that nothing could be done. But something could be done. Something would be done. I just needed to figure out exactly what. 3 days into my investigation, I discovered something that changed everything. I had been poring over municipal zoning documents, looking for any legal precedent that might help challenge Sheriff Sheila's authority over public land use. What I found instead was far more valuable. The Riverdale Sheriff's Station, a squat, brick building at the edge of Main Street, sat on a parcel of land with an unusual designation. According to the original town planning documents from 1978, the station was classified as a temporary emergency operations site, intended to serve as an interim facility until a permanent structure could be built. That permanent structure had never materialized. Budget constraints and changing priorities had transformed the temporary solution into a permanent one. But the zoning designation had never been updated, and buried in the technical language of that designation was an extraordinary clause. If the site remained inactive for 72 consecutive hours, its use could be temporarily reassigned for public benefit activities until emergency operations resumed. I read the clause 3 times, certain I must be misinterpreting it, but the language was clear. The provision had been included to ensure that valuable town property would not sit unused during extended periods of low emergency activity. In an era before cell phones and modern dispatch systems, when rural sheriff departments might close for holiday weekends or special events, the town had wanted a mechanism to utilize the space. The provision had never been invoked. It had likely been forgotten by everyone except perhaps the most meticulous town clerk, but it remained legally valid, never superseded by subsequent ordinances. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing with possibilities. Sheriff Sheila had used technicalities and selective interpretation of regulations to enforce her will on the townspeople. Perhaps it was time she experienced the same treatment. The plan began to take shape in my mind, audacious, possibly reckless, but legally sound. If I could confirm that the sheriff's station would be minimally staffed for the upcoming holiday weekend, with operations primarily conducted through mobile units rather than the central office, I could potentially invoke the temporary reassignment clause. I made 3 phone calls, each carefully phrased to avoid suspicion. The first to the station itself, inquiring about filing a non-emergency report during the holiday weekend. "We will be running a skeleton crew," the dispatcher informed me. "Unless it is an emergency, you would be better off coming in next Tuesday." The second call went to the town clerk's office, where I requested clarification on the process for filing a public demonstration permit. Peaceful assemblies on public property require a standard form submitted 48 hours in advance, the clerk explained. As long as you are not obstructing essential services, approval is generally automatic. The third call was to a lawyer friend in the next county over, hypothetically outlining my plan without revealing specific details. "It is technically legal," he confirmed after some consideration. "Unusual, but if the zoning designation is as you described, and if the reassignment clause has never been officially nullified, you would have grounds to proceed. Just be prepared for pushback." Pushback was precisely what I was counting on. I spent the next day drafting the necessary paperwork. First, a formal request to invoke the temporary reassignment clause, citing the holiday weekend as the 72-hour period of reduced activity. Second, a public demonstration permit application, describing the nature of the assembly as a peaceful camping demonstration to highlight issues of public land access and authority overreach. I was careful with my language, avoiding any direct reference to Sheriff Sheila or specific grievances. This was not about personal vendetta, but about principle, about restoring balance to a system that had tilted too far toward unchecked authority. Word spread quietly through the network of people I had interviewed, those who had experienced Sheriff Sheila's arbitrary enforcement firsthand, those who had suffered the consequences of challenging her. They were cautious at first, wary of reprisals, but as I explained the legal foundation of the plan, their caution gave way to cautious optimism. "You mean we could actually do something? Something that would not just get ignored or buried?" asked Martin Reynolds, the music teacher. "If enough of us participate, yes," I told him. "The key is to be absolutely by the book. No violations, no excuses for intervention. We will beat her at her own game." By Friday afternoon, I had 6 confirmed participants, people willing to join me in what we had begun calling Operation Reclaim. We would arrive at dawn on Saturday, tents and camping gear in hand, prepared to exercise our lawful right to temporarily repurpose an underutilized public space. The paperwork was filed. The plans were set. All that remained was to see how Sheriff Sheila would respond when her own tactics were turned against her, when her station became our campground. Saturday morning arrived with the perfect weather for our demonstration: clear skies, mild temperature, a gentle breeze. The same conditions I had hoped to enjoy during my thwarted camping trip. The irony was not lost on me as I loaded my tent and supplies into my truck one more time. We had agreed to meet at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the sheriff's station at 5:30 a.m. I arrived first, securing a large table in the corner where we could review our plan one final time. One by one, the others filtered in: Martin Reynolds, the music teacher; Elaine Mercer and her son Todd in his wheelchair; the Johnsons, whose wedding had been relocated; and David Chen, a small business owner whose outdoor market had been repeatedly shut down. "Everyone clear on the procedures?" I asked, keeping my voice low despite the empty cafe. We set up quietly and orderly. No blocking pathways. No obstruction of doors or emergency exits. We maintain a respectful distance from the building itself, utilizing only the front lawn area. If approached by officers, we remain calm and polite. We present our permits only when directly asked. Nervous nods circled the table. We were not protesters by nature. We were ordinary citizens: a teacher, a mother, a small business owner, a would-be camper, brought together by a shared experience of arbitrary authority. "Remember," I continued, "we have done everything legally. The station is officially designated as a temporary emergency operations site with minimal staff this weekend. We have invoked the reassignment clause according to proper procedure. We have filed our demonstration permits. We are within our rights." At 6:00 a.m. sharp, we gathered our supplies and walked the 2 blocks to the sheriff's station. The building sat dark and quiet, with only a single patrol car in the parking lot, evidence of the skeleton crew I had been informed about. The front lawn, usually pristine and empty, would soon become our campground. We worked methodically, setting up our tents in a neat semicircle on the grass. David Chen brought a small portable camp stove, which we placed at a safe distance from any structures. Elaine had helped Todd create colorful signs that read "Public land for public use" and "Equal access for all." These we displayed prominently beside our encampment. By 7:30 a.m., our small tent city was established. We sat in folding chairs, sipping coffee from thermoses, maintaining the appearance of a peaceful camping demonstration. Passers-by slowed their cars, some honking in apparent support, others staring in confusion at the unexpected sight. At 8:15 a.m., a local news van pulled up across the street. A young reporter and a cameraman emerged, approaching our group with evident curiosity. "Hi there," the reporter began, notebook in hand. "I am Sarah Chen from Riverdale Local News. Mind telling me what is happening here?" I had been selected as our spokesperson, and I stood to greet her. "We are conducting a peaceful demonstration regarding public land access in Riverdale. We have all the proper permits and authorizations." "You are camping on the sheriff's station's lawn," she observed, the hint of a smile playing at her lips. "That is certainly a unique form of protest." "Not protest," I corrected gently. "Demonstration. This property is officially designated as a temporary emergency operations site that can be reassigned for public use during periods of inactivity. We are simply exercising that provision to raise awareness about access to public spaces." The interview continued for several minutes, with each participant sharing their experiences with permit revocations and arbitrary enforcement. The camera captured our well-organized campsite, the peaceful atmosphere, the diverse group of citizens united by a common cause. As the news crew prepared to leave, the distinctive sound of tires squealing against pavement drew our attention to the street. Sheriff Sheila's SUV swerved into the parking lot, coming to an abrupt halt. She emerged from the vehicle, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" she demanded, striding toward us with one hand resting on her holstered weapon. I stepped forward, maintaining a respectful distance. "Good morning, Sheriff Harmon. We are conducting a peaceful camping demonstration." "On Sheriff Department property," her voice rose sharply. "You have exactly 60 seconds to dismantle this absurdity before I arrest every one of you for trespassing and obstruction of justice." "We are not trespassing," I replied, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "We have filed all necessary paperwork invoking the temporary reassignment clause applicable to this property. We also have an approved demonstration permit. We are well within our legal rights to be here." I extended the folder containing our documentation. Sheriff Sheila snatched it from my hand, her eyes scanning the pages with increasing disbelief. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. It is outdated, it is not applicable." "The clause has never been removed from the town charter," I countered. "It remains legally binding. We consulted with legal counsel before proceeding." The news crew, which had been preparing to leave, quickly resumed filming as the confrontation unfolded. Sheriff Sheila noticed the camera and visibly struggled to compose herself. "You cannot simply set up camp on government property," she insisted, but her tone had shifted from outrage to uncertainty. "According to Town Ordinance 157B, Section 3, Paragraph 4, during periods when this facility is operating with minimal staff for more than 72 consecutive hours, the grounds may be temporarily reassigned for public benefit activities that do not impede essential operations," I recited, having memorized the clause word for word. "We are not blocking access to the building. We are not interfering with operations. We are simply exercising our right to use this public space in the same way you have exercised your authority over other public spaces." The meaning behind my words was clear. This was not just about camping. This was about accountability, about consequences for the arbitrary exercise of power. Sheriff Sheila stood frozen, the documentation clutched in her hand, the news camera capturing every moment of her indecision. The tables had turned. She was experiencing what so many others in town had felt, the frustration of being caught in a web of technicalities and regulations wielded with surgical precision. "This is not over," she finally said, her voice low and controlled. "Not by a long shot." As she turned to storm back into the station, I called after her, "Sheriff Harmon." She paused but did not turn around. "We will be here all weekend. Feel free to join us. The permit allows for up to 20 participants." She did not respond, but as the door to the station slammed behind her, a cheer erupted from our small group, quickly joined by several onlookers who had gathered to witness the confrontation. The battle had just begun, but the first victory was ours. The protest had taken on a life of its own. What began as a simple act of defiance had morphed into something much larger than I could have imagined. By noon on the second day, social media had picked up our story, and soon Camp Constitution was trending locally. Someone had even created a meme of Sheila's face superimposed on a cartoon dictator, with tents being hurled at her like missiles. People from neighboring towns began sharing their own stories in the comments. "Sheriff Sheila gave my son a ticket for fishing without a license at the town pond," one wrote. "But when the mayor's kid did the same thing, she looked the other way." Another person recounted how she had shut down their charity bake sale for operating without proper food permits. The pattern was clear, and now it was public. I watched as more cars pulled up to the station, families with children, elderly couples with folding chairs, college students with guitars. They all came with tents and sleeping bags, adding to our growing encampment. The lawn had transformed into a vibrant community space, alive with conversation and laughter. "I cannot believe this many people showed up," whispered Maria, one of the original protesters. She had lost her small business permit last year after crossing Sheila at a town meeting. "People have been waiting for a chance to stand up to her," I replied. "They just needed someone to go first." Sheila tried to control the narrative. She issued a press statement claiming we were dangerous anarchists and attempted to restrict media access to the station. But in the age of smartphones, every moment was documented. When she pushed a reporter off the sidewalk, the video was online within minutes. The town council could no longer ignore what was happening. Councilman Reeves arrived around sunset, pulling me aside as volunteers prepared dinner at our makeshift camp kitchen. "This is impressive," he said quietly, eyes scanning the crowded lawn. "Between us, there have been concerns about Sheila for years, but nobody had the evidence or the courage to challenge her." "It is not courage," I told him. "It is just exhaustion. Everyone has a breaking point." He nodded slowly. "There is an emergency council meeting tomorrow. You might want to attend." He handed me his card and walked away. That night, I sat outside my tent, watching the stars appear above our little revolution. The sheriff's station lights remained on all night, and occasionally I caught glimpses of Sheila packing inside, phone pressed to her ear. The intimidating figure who had torn my permit was now the one trapped, surrounded by the very people she had tried to control. The town was no longer afraid. They were laughing. And as the firelight danced across the faces of families roasting marshmallows on the sheriff's station's front lawn, I realized we had already won, regardless of what happened next. Morning brought Sheila's counteroffensive. As the sun crested over the trees, she emerged from the station with a thick stack of papers and a deputy trailing behind her. The determined set of her jaw told me everything I needed to know. She was not going down without a fight. "Attention, campers," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning quiet. "You are all being issued citations for the following violations." She began moving tent to tent, slapping papers into surprised hands. "Littering, improper waste disposal, unauthorized food preparation, public health code violations, trespassing on restricted portions of a government facility." I intercepted her before she reached the family with small children. "These citations are baseless," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We have maintained this area meticulously. There is no litter. We have portable toilets. All food is being prepared according to safety guidelines." Sheila leaned in close. "You think you are clever," she hissed, "but this ends today." Within an hour, county health inspectors arrived in white vans. Clipboards in hand, they combed through our encampment, checking every cooler, every trash bag, every portable toilet. The media followed, capturing it all. I made sure everyone remained calm and cooperative. After 3 hours of inspection, the lead health officer approached me. "We found no violations that warrant concern," she said, loud enough for the cameras to hear. "Your group appears to be following proper sanitation protocols." Sheila's face darkened as the health inspectors left without issuing a single citation. By midday, she had retreated to the station, but her cruiser roared out of the parking lot shortly after. We soon discovered where she had gone. "She is at the courthouse filing for an emergency removal order," reported one of our supporters, a legal secretary who had texted us the information. Judge Harmon is hearing it right now. We waited anxiously. Judge Harmon was known to be by the book but fair. 3 hours later, we received word. The emergency order had been denied. On what grounds? I asked our informant over the phone. The judge cited free speech protections and said that, without evidence of actual law breaking, he could not authorize removal of a peaceful protest. She paused. He also mentioned that the sheriff's request seemed personally motivated rather than public safety oriented. Relief washed over our camp. That evening, Sheila called a press conference on the station steps, forcing our group to move aside. The cameras captured everything, our orderly encampment surrounding her as she tried to maintain composure. These individuals are obstructing justice and preventing law enforcement from doing its job, she declared, her voice rising with each word. They claim to be protesting, but this is nothing more than a personal vendetta against me for enforcing the law. A reporter raised his hand. Sheriff, could you address the allegations that you have selectively enforced permits and regulations against certain citizens? Her composure slipped. That is absurd. I enforce the law equally for everyone. Then, why did the town council request access to your permit denial records this morning? Another reporter called out. Sheila had no answer. She ended the press conference abruptly, pushing past reporters and storming back into the station. Through the windows, we could see her packing, gesturing wildly as she spoke on the phone. At the town council meeting the next day, Sheila arrived late, uniform pressed but eyes wild. When citizens lined up to speak about their experiences with her selective enforcement, she interrupted repeatedly until the council chair threatened to have her removed. You cannot remove me, she snapped. I am the law in this town. The room fell silent. In those 6 words, she had revealed everything the town needed to know. She was not a public servant but a ruler, and her kingdom was crumbling. The emergency town council meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. Word had spread quickly, and by 6:30 the town hall was filled beyond capacity. People stood along the walls, sat on the floor, and spilled out into the hallway. I arrived early, folder tucked under my arm, heart pounding against my ribs. Quite the turnout, remarked Councilwoman Peters, adjusting the microphone at the central table. I have not seen this many people at a council meeting since the great property tax debate of 2016. The council members filed in, followed by the town attorney and lastly, Sheriff Sheila herself. She wore her full uniform, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her eyes swept over the crowd, lingering on me with undisguised contempt. Council President Winters brought the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. Tonight's emergency session concerns the enforcement authority of the county sheriff's department, specifically as it relates to public land use and permitting. The first witness was Walter Simmons, retired Parks Department supervisor. He walked slowly to the podium, back straight despite his 70-plus years. I served this town for 32 years, he began, voice gravelly but strong, and I have never seen such misuse of authority as I have under Sheriff Sheila's administration. He detailed multiple incidents: a children's nature club forced to cancel their meetings, an elderly bird-watching group threatened with trespassing charges, a veterans' fishing event shut down mid-ceremony. Each time the justification was different but the pattern was the same, Walter concluded. If Sheriff Sheila did not approve of you personally, you did not get to use public spaces. Period. Sheila shifted in her seat, scribbling furiously on a legal pad. When Walter finished, she stood immediately. These accusations are coming from a disgruntled former employee who was reprimanded multiple times for safety violations, she countered. Mr. Simmons has a personal vendetta against law enforcement. I have no vendetta, Walter replied calmly. I have documentation. He produced a thick folder of emails, incident reports, and citizen complaints that he had quietly collected over the years. The council members passed them around, faces growing increasingly somber. When my turn came, my legs felt wooden as I approached the podium. I placed my own folder on the small lectern and opened it carefully. "My name is Name," I began, my voice trembling slightly before steadying. "3 weeks ago, Sheriff Sheila tore up my camping permit without cause or explanation." I recounted my experience, then gestured to the growing encampment outside the sheriff's station. What started as one person standing up has revealed a systematic abuse of power that has affected dozens, perhaps hundreds of citizens. I presented my evidence methodically. A spreadsheet of permit denials showing clear patterns of favoritism, testimonials from citizens who had experienced similar treatment, and documentation of the applicable laws and regulations that Sheila had repeatedly violated. Sheriff Sheila has not enforced the law, I concluded. She has weaponized it. Public land belongs to the public, not to those who curry favor with the sheriff's department. The room erupted in applause. Sheila's face had gone from red to white, her knuckles tense as she gripped the edge of the table. The council deliberated for nearly an hour. When they returned, Council President Winters looked directly at Sheila as he announced their decision. By unanimous vote, the council has determined that effective immediately, all public land use permitting and enforcement will be transferred from the Sheriff's Department to the Parks and Recreation Department, with oversight from a newly formed Citizens Review Board. Sheila stood abruptly. "You cannot do this. My department has statutory authority, which is superseded by the Town Charter, Section 14.3, allowing for emergency reassignment of duties when evidence suggests abuse of authority," the town attorney interrupted calmly. "The council's decision is legally binding, Sheriff." The room broke into cheers. Sheila's jurisdiction had been dramatically reduced with the stroke of a pen. She stalked out without another word, the heavy door slamming behind her. Her badge still gleamed on her chest, but its power had been fundamentally altered. As I gathered my papers, Councilwoman Peters approached me. "Thank you for your courage," she said quietly. "Sometimes the system works, it just needs a push." Outside, the night air felt different somehow. Lighter, freer. The campers were waiting for news, and when I gave them thumbs up, their cheers echoed across the town square, all the way to the sheriff's station, where the lights burned late into the night. The news spread like wildfire through town. "Sheriff stripped of power," read the headline in the morning paper. Beneath it, a photograph of our tent city surrounding the sheriff's station had become the visual symbol of our victory. But I knew we were not finished. A movement needs momentum, and real change requires celebration and codification. "We need to make this permanent," I told the core group of protesters over breakfast at our camp kitchen. "The council's decision is a start, but Sheila still has supporters. Eventually, this could all be reversed." Maria nodded, pouring coffee into paper cups. "What are you thinking?" "A town-wide camping celebration," I replied, "and a formal petition for a permanent Citizens Review Board, not just for parks, but for all law enforcement activities in the county." We spent the day spreading the word, distributing flyers, and making phone calls. I filed the formal paperwork for the review board at the county clerk's office, carefully drafting language that would give citizens oversight not just in theory but in practice. Sheriff Sheila tried one last maneuver. A press release appeared on the county website. Sheriff announces new community relations initiative. It promised transparency, community input, and a fresh approach to public space management. The timing was transparent, a desperate attempt to undercut our momentum. No one paid attention, not even the local news station, which had once fearfully reported her every pronouncement. Her power had always been built on fear, and once that foundation cracked, the entire structure collapsed. Saturday dawned clear and perfect. I arrived at the town's central field at sunrise to begin setting up. By mid-morning, trucks had delivered portable toilets, picnic tables, and a small stage. Volunteers strung lanterns between trees. The mayor arrived early, rolling up his sleeves to help position the fire pits. "Never thought I would see the day," he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. Sheila had half the council in her pocket for years. Nobody dared cross her. "Why did you?" I asked. He gestured to the families already arriving with blankets and coolers. "Because you showed them they did not have to be afraid anymore." By noon, the field was packed. Hundreds of people spread across the grass, grandparents in lawn chairs, children flying kites, teenagers setting up tents. The smell of barbecue filled the air. A local band set up on the stage, acoustic guitars and banjos creating a festive atmosphere. Many of Sheila's victims were there. The scout leader whose camping trip had been canceled. The young couple whose wedding had been moved at the last minute. The fishing tournament organizer who had been cited for excessive vehicles at the lake. Each had a story, and now they had justice. At dusk, I was asked to say a few words. Standing on the small stage, looking out at the sea of faces lit by campfires and string lights, I felt the weight of everything we had accomplished. 3 weeks ago, a permit was torn up in front of me, I began. It was a small injustice, the kind we often walk away from because fighting seems too hard. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But sometimes the smallest injustice reveals the largest problem, and sometimes a single tent can start a revolution. Cheers erupted across the field. I raised my hand for quiet. Tomorrow, the county commissioners will receive our petition for a permanent citizens review board. This board will oversee all law enforcement actions related to public spaces, permits, and community events. No one person will ever again have unchecked power over our shared land. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding. From my vantage point on stage, I could see the sheriff's station in the distance, dark and quiet. Sheila's cruiser was nowhere to be seen. After my speech, people approached to shake my hand, share their stories, or simply say thank you. An elderly woman pressed something into my palm, a small, hand-carved wooden key. "My husband made this before he passed," she explained. "He always said it was the key to our special place by the lake. Sheila banned us from going there last year, said it was restricted area. Now we can go back." I closed my fingers around the small token, feeling its weight. As night fell and campfires burned across the field, the true meaning of our victory became clear. This was never about camping permits or bureaucratic rules. It was about reclaiming something fundamental, the right to exist in public spaces without fear. That night, hundreds of tents glowed like paper lanterns across the field. Inside each one, people slept without worry of a flashlight in their face or a citation on their windshield. Freedom sometimes arrives in unexpected packages, in our case, nylon and aluminum poles. The official announcement came on a Tuesday morning, buried in the third page of the county newsletter. Sheriff Sheila Barnes announces resignation, cites personal reasons. There was no press conference, no dramatic final stand, just a brief statement citing stress and the changing nature of community expectations as her reasons for stepping down. I read the notice while sitting at my usual spot by the lake, fishing rod propped against a tree, coffee warming my hands against the morning chill. The victory felt both monumental and strangely anticlimactic. Goliath had fallen not with a dramatic crash but with a bureaucratic whimper. Deputy Chief Morris was appointed interim sheriff, a reasonable man known for his level-headed approach. His first official act was to issue a public apology for past overreach in enforcement activities, and to announce full cooperation with the newly formed Citizens Review Board. Life resumed its rhythm. I returned to work. The protest camp outside the sheriff's station was dismantled, each tent carefully packed away, the ground beneath restored to pristine condition. But something fundamental had changed in our town. I noticed it in small ways. People making eye contact more readily, speaking up at town meetings, using public spaces without looking over their shoulders. The following weekend, I returned to my camping spot, the same one where Sheila had torn up my permit. This time, I brought the official approval letter from the Parks Department, though I knew I would not need it. As I unloaded my gear, a truck pulled up nearby. Then another, and another. "Hope you do not mind neighbors," called Maria, waving from her vehicle. Behind her came Walter, the retired park supervisor, along with several others who had stood with us during the protest. "The more the merrier," I replied, genuinely pleased. What had once been my solitary retreat was transforming into something new. By nightfall, a small community had formed. Tents dotted the clearing. A communal fire burned bright. Stories and laughter flowed as freely as the coffee passed from hand to hand. I realized that I did not mind the company. In fact, I welcomed it. "Never been camping before," admitted Councilwoman Peters, who had surprised everyone by showing up with a brand new tent still in its packaging. "Always thought it was not for people like me." "What changed your mind?" I asked. She gestured around the circle. "You all did. Made me realize public land truly is for everyone." The changes rippled outward through the seasons. The field where we had held our celebration became the site of regular community gatherings, outdoor movie nights in summer, harvest festivals in fall, snow sculpture contests in winter. The Citizens Review Board met monthly, their proceedings transparent and well-attended. More importantly, a new culture took root. When the school board tried to limit access to the track field after hours, parents showed up at the meeting with camping chairs and refused to leave until the policy was reconsidered. When county commissioners suggested increasing permit fees for the farmers market, vendors united and succeeded in keeping costs accessible. 1 year after Sheila tore up my permit, I stood on the shore of the lake, watching the sunset paint the water gold. A family picnicked nearby, their children skipping stones across the surface. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path that had once been off-limits. A teenager photographed birds from a homemade blind. I had not set out to become an activist or a symbol. I had just wanted my weekend in nature, my small piece of peace. But sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of resistance. One person refusing to accept injustice. One tent staked on contested ground. As darkness fell, I lit my campfire and settled into my chair. The stars emerged overhead, bright and countless. Around me, other fires flickered to life as my fellow campers prepared for evening. Voices called back and forth between sites, sharing food, stories, and camaraderie. In the distance, I could see the lights of town, including the sheriff's station. It was just a building now, not a fortress. Its power had been returned to where it belonged, with the people. I sipped my coffee and smiled. This was what victory really looked like. Not the fall of an opponent, but the rise of a community. Not the absence of authority, but its proper place in service to the public. Not isolation, but connection. I had come full circle. I had fought for solitude and gained community. I had defended my right to be alone and discovered the joy of belonging. The irony was not lost on me. Neither was the beauty of it. That night I slept more soundly than I had in years, tent flap open to the stars, at peace with the world and my place in it. No permit could ever capture what I had truly gained, something that could not be issued, revoked, or torn in two. The knowledge that one person, one tent, and one principled stand can change everything.